Yvette Cooper, does it concern that you're presiding over a country where 20 police officers armed with lasers break down the door of a Quaker meeting house to arrest 6 women eating breadsticks and hummus, none of whom, by the way, 3 days later is charged with a single offence?
Morning, Trevor. Good to see you this morning. So, as you know, we have operational independence for the police in this country. I've made clear to policing that the priorities, the government's priorities, are around serious violence. We have them set a mission to halve serious violence over the next 10 years. And also dealing with those neighbourhood crimes, the local crimes, particularly in town centres, that have the greatest impact on communities. The police do have operational independence. They have to take decisions, and there will be decisions that they take that do need to have greater scrutiny. But those are matters for chief constables, or in the case of London, for the Met Commissioner, rather than for the Home Secretary.
But this comes on the back of another story where parents and school are visited by the police. 6 police turn up and they take away their computers and so on the basis of apparently WhatsApp messages, maybe a lot of them, but nonetheless. This is an odd thing for Britain. Does it show that J.D. Vance has a point when he says that in Britain free speech is in retreat?
No, we have a long tradition, not just of free speech, but of freedom of assembly, of a whole series of different freedoms that are really important in the UK.
It's a great long tradition, but it seems to be
we also have an important tradition of independence for the police, and the police need to operate without fear or favour. I think that other case that you referred to, the Hertfordshire Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable, as I understand it, have also instigated a review into that case. I think the Police and Crime Commissioner has said the view is that this was a breakdown of the relationship between the school and parents, which in his view should they need to look at other ways to deal with that rather than involving the police. But that's the Police and Crime Commissioner's engagement, and it's right that in individual forces, Police and Crime Commissioners have oversight of their forces. But as you know, if you had the Home Secretary trying to direct the police in different ways, that really would cut across some of our really important freedoms in this country, where the police need to operate independently from the Home Secretary.
Indeed, but you are also the elected politician who is, to some extent, the guardian of our human rights, our rights to be free from interference by the institutions of the state. So at the very least, this is something you should keep your eye on, isn't it?
Well, it's why we're introducing a new performance framework for policing. As part of our policing reforms, we've got a new white paper that we're drawing up, which will set really a much clearer performance framework, the priorities that we want the police forces across the country to concentrate on. That is around the serious violence, halving knife crime, violence against women and girls, but also the things like the shoplifting, the street theft, mobile phone theft. So we'll be very clear about what we see as the priorities for policing, and also the way in which police forces will be monitored on that, the way in which they will be assessed, and the way in which we make sure that standards are being met. On individual judgments, look, the police make thousands of arrests every single day. They have to be accountable for those judgments on their own individual operations, but we are setting out a much stronger framework, because I don't think that happened in the past.
All right, let's talk about some of the challenges that are going to face you actually this week. First of all, we're going to see the imposition of tariffs by President Trump. 2 questions, really. First of all, have we had any success in getting the Americans to exempt us from the tariffs? And if we haven't, how much damage do you think this is going to do to our economy?
Well, we clearly want to see reductions in barriers to trade, not increases in barriers to trade. So, obviously, we were very disappointed at the US decision to introduce tariffs, including around auto and steel and so on. And there are, I think the Chancellor has said, continuing intense discussions with the US. But look, this is part of a wider, we want to see a reduction
get a deal by Wednesday, are we?
in tariffs, and we will continue with those discussions. discussions.
But we're not going to get a deal by Wednesday, are we?
Well, we will keep discussions underway, but we'll also keep all options on the table as well. And the UK government will always be operating in the national interest for the UK as well.
But how serious... OK, but how serious... You're an economist. How seriously do you think that this will damage our economy?
Well, I think it's the point I made at the beginning, which is that in the end, if you increase barriers to trade right across the world, that's not good for the world economy, let alone any individual country as part of that. So that's why our approach to this has been to try and seek new trade agreements across the world, including improving our trading relationship with the EU as well as with the EU and the US. So this is about removing barriers rather than increasing them. And I don't think any business wants to see a trade war either.
OK, so I talked to a French Europe minister, interviews later on in this programme, and he says that actually, same thing as you, but their approach is to say we will retaliate. We're not going to retaliate.
Well, the Prime Minister has said that no option is off the table and we will continue to approach this in the UK national interest. That's the important thing. We obviously can't keep a running commentary on different discussions that are taking place, but we have to always make sure that we're acting in the national interest.
All right, let's talk about your own portfolio, if we may. You've announced this morning you're going to find and deport people who've overstayed their visas. How are you going to do that?
Well, we're already increasing returns. So we've returned over 19,000 people since the election. We'll be updating those figures shortly. And those figures, that was a 20% increase on returns compared to the previous year. That's as a result of much stronger operations with other countries, but also increasing our enforcement action here in the UK, because, frankly, the rules need to be respected and enforced, and I think they haven't been for too long. That's why we're substantially increasing the returns of foreign national offenders, of failed asylum seekers, and of those who have overstayed their visas.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, 19,000. Let's talk about the scale. The American Department of Homeland Security estimates that their number of undocumented migrants there, 11 million. Latest study funded by the EU and by our own research councils for 12 large EU countries says that number is between 2.6 and 3.2 million. Do you know how many illegal immigrants there are here in Britain?
The previous government had different analyses, and there hasn't been proper assessment and evidence on this. But one of the reasons it's one of the reasons we are taking stronger action on illegal working. So we're introducing an amendment to the Border Security and Asylum Bill, which is to actually strengthen the requirements on employers in the gig economy to start checking people's eligibility for work, because, frankly, it is too easy at the moment for employers to take people on illegally through those contract mechanisms without those checks in place. And we know the criminal gangs, which our summit this week is going to be about, the criminal gangs who are operating are often offering people fake employment in the UK, as well as making them false promises about travel.
I get the point about your plans, but your colleague Angela Eagle was here some weeks ago, and she told me that you really couldn't say how many undocumented migrants there were because they're undocumented. So if you can't even find them, you don't know how many there are, how are you going to make a difference? And the scale, the best study we have, I think, from Oxford University says something like 750,000. The scale is way beyond the measures that you're taking, isn't it?
Well, we've already got a 20% increase, and we've only been doing in government for 8 or 9 months.
But you're talking about tens of thousands against a total of hundreds of thousands.
Secondly, we're strengthening the law in a series of different ways, including on illegal employment. We've got a 40% increase in our illegal working raids, a 40% increase in arrests for illegal working, increasing action against employers who are illegally, unlawfully employing people. So we're addressing this in different ways. You're right that we've inherited a broken system around both asylum and immigration. And bit by bit, we are turning things around and taking the steps to reform the system. When you say bit by bit, you're telling me about 5,000-10,000, when the total number, as far as we've got an indication, and you guys won't tell us what you think the number is in hundreds of thousands. Are the measures you're taking anywhere near the scale of the problem? Well, It's a substantial increase already. The 20% increase in returns, the 40% increase in illegal working raids in just 8 or 9 months. So that is a substantial increase in actually tackling the rogue employers and the way that they are exploiting people. They're also undercutting legitimate businesses. We're now bringing in new counter-terror-style powers to tackle the criminal gangs, and today and tomorrow we will be bringing together this unprecedented border security and organised immigration crime summit that will be bringing over 40 countries, interior ministers and law enforcement for all over the world. Because this is a criminal industry, global criminal industry, that is worth billions of pounds of exploitation, dangerous crimes that they are committing, and we need that international cooperation in order to bring those gangs down.
Yeah, you several times when we've spoken have said your aim is to smash the gangs and so on the small boats crossings. We've hit the 5,000 crossings mark earlier than ever before. Shouldn't we get our own house in order before we try to be leader of the pack?
Well, the networks, the criminal gang networks that end up with people arriving in the UK stretch back through northern France, through Germany, across Europe, to places like the hills of Kurdistan or the money markets in Kabul. So you need to tackle this as a global problem. But in terms of the channel, we have now new agreements with France, that France have now changed their rules so that for the first time they're prepared to take action in French waters.
But
now, the previous government...
We spent 500 million on the French. Are we getting value for money?
Well, we've changed the agreements with France now in a couple of important ways. So for many years, the previous government had tried to persuade France to take action in French waters, and that hasn't happened. The French government has now changed the rules. Their cabinet has changed the rules so that they can now intervene in French waters to prevent these dangerous boat crossings. I think that's really important. That will be operationalised later this year. They're also going to bring in a new sort of elite police unit. It's similar to the one that operated during the Olympics and was successful in tackling boat crossings during the Olympics. That's going to be brought in May, and they're strengthening the resources along the French coast. That is part of the work that we've been doing with France, and it's alongside our work here in the UK to reduce illegal working and to reduce the way in which the gangs are making promises. That partnership is really important because ultimately this is effectively a global war on the criminal smuggler and trafficking gangs.
One other way in which we might tackle the problem of illegal immigration is by deterrence. How close are you to a third country deal with Albania that's been reported that you're talking about?
Well, we already have return agreements with Albania, and that's an important part of the system. We're also working across the board to increase our returns everywhere. That's why we've got the 20% increase in returns already as a result of the work that we're doing. This is a slightly different kind of deal. It's not just about returns. It's about processing. It's about basically telling people who think they're going to get here and stay here illegally, no, you're not. You're going to go to Albania. Let's forget Rwanda, but somewhere else. So I think what you're talking about is the arrangement, obviously, that Italy and Albania have set up, which we've always said we will look at. I've talked to the Italian Interior Minister about their arrangements.
And would you like to have the same deal for us?
We will always look at what works. So we've been very clear about that. We will always look at what works. But it has to be practical things that will work, not the gimmicks. What we saw with Rwanda was £700 million be spent on sending 4 volunteers to Rwanda. We'll always make sure that our approach is about what works, and that's why our focus is on tackling the criminal gangs and the networks that organise this.
But to be clear, we are talking to Albania or some other countries about that kind of deal. David Blunkett said, one of your predecessors said, why don't we draw up a list of safe countries with whom we can have this sort of deal? So are you talking to Albania or any other country about that Italian-style deal?
We've talked to the Italian government about the arrangements that they have, and we've always said we'll look at what works. We're also talking to the EU Commission, who are interested in different approaches around return hubs. That's the kind of thing that you're talking about. But our central focus is on the borders, the summit, the Organised Immigration Crime Summit, and on tackling the criminal gangs. We will continue to look at different different approaches that, if they have a practical impact and if they can work to prevent these dangerous boat crossings which undermine our border security and put lives at risk.
A question about the spring statement. Later I'll be talking to the chairman of the disability charity Scope. He called the Chancellor's plans on welfare benefits catastrophic. He said that they'd push more disabled people into poverty. And I'm quoting him here. He said, it's obvious that these cuts are simply about saving money and not for a moral desire to get more people into work. That is brutal, isn't it?
Well, I think that Liz Kendall, the Work and Pensions Secretary, as well as the Chancellor, set out the purpose for the reforms being to help people into work. We have seen a different situation in the UK compared to other, not just European countries, other major economies after the pandemic, where other countries have seen their employment rates go back up after the pandemic. In the UK, that we haven't. In fact, we've seen the number of people claiming disability benefits has increased much faster than the increase in the number of people who are disabled. So there is something that's going wrong in the UK system, and that's why the focus that Liz Kendall has set out has been about what do we need to do to make sure that people aren't getting trapped on disability and out of work sickness benefits and actually can get back into work.
He's saying in terms, he just doesn't believe you. He thinks this is just straightforwardly about cuts and disabled people are bearing the brunt of the government's financial problems.
Well, I think when you've got 1 in 8 young people who are now out of work or education completely, we've also had a big increase in the number of people in their 20s and 30s who are out of work for health reasons. Of course, you want people in their 20s and 30s to be going into work, to be getting the opportunities to get back on track. Some of that is going to be about improving health treatment, including mental health treatment and including bringing waiting lists down. But it's also got to be about supporting people into work, making sure that there are regular in-person assessments rather than people having no assessment in person at all. Because if you get people into work, that halves the chance of somebody being in poverty.
Yvette Cooper, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Trevor.